Most people think that grief is about death, and it is. But there's another kind of grief that doesn't have a funeral, it doesn't turn up with casseroles at your door. It doesn't get acknowledged by anyone around you, including sometimes yourself. And it's the grief of losing who you used to be. And it can be one of the most disorientating experiences a person can go through. And let me ask you something. Have you ever felt that deep, heavy sadness about something and had absolutely no idea what to call it? Nothing catastrophic has happened, nobody died, your life looks fine from the outside, and yet something in you is mourning. And that feeling has a name. And today we're going to work through that. Because here's the thing, grief is not only for death, it's for the relationship that ended, the version of you that you had to leave behind, the life you thought you were going to have, even the person you were before something changed everything. And if that landed, stay with me, because what you're carrying has a name, and naming it is where it first starts to shift. And also, if you stay with me to the end, I have a simple 3-step exercise that will help you identify what your nervous system has actually been carrying and why it's showing up the way it is right now. So, most of us were taught a very narrow definition of grief. Someone dies, you're sad, you go through stages, and then eventually you move on. And that framework can account for one specific kind of loss and leaves everything else pretty much unnamed. But loss takes many forms. You can grieve the end of a relationship with someone who's still alive and well. You can grieve a version of your life that never happened. You can grieve a person you were before illness, before trauma, before a decision that changed everything. You can even grieve a future that you'd already built in your mind that never arrived. And none of these come with a ritual. Nobody brings flowers, nobody asks you how you're holding up 3 months later. And because there's no external marker for the loss, most people do not give themselves permission to grieve at all. And here's the thing, grief doesn't require a death certificate. It requires only that something real to you has gone. And this is the one that catches people most off guard, identity loss. The grief of looking back at a version of yourself, the person you were before the relationship, before the diagnosis, before the breakdown, before the awakening, before the years of people pleasing finally caught up with you. Yeah, and realizing, that person's gone. That's not me anymore. And sometimes that loss is a relief, but often it is grief, even when the change was necessary, even when you know you're better off for it, even when you chose it. You can simultaneously know that who you are becoming is right for you and still mourn who you had to leave behind to get there. Because you're allowed to grieve a version of yourself. You're allowed to grieve that version that you're glad that you outgrew. Because growth and grief are not opposites. They often arrive together. I went through this experience many years ago when I went through cancer myself and was supporting my mum who passed away through cancer. And when that happened, I was at a point where I had to build my life from scratch. And what I was building was authentic to the person that I was after that experience. But I still was grieving those simpler times, times when my mum was alive, when my body wasn't covered in scars from surgery, when life was easier and healthier and simpler. And this was something that I discovered long after the grief of losing my mum. And that too is a real loss. It's that loss of self, which almost nobody names or acknowledges. And here's what happens when grief does not get named. It doesn't go away. It goes sideways. It shows up as irritability, as numbness, as low-level sadness that you can't trace to anything specific. It can be a restlessness that nothing seems to fix. It shows up as looking for the feeling of home in people and places that cannot give it to you. Because what you are actually missing is something that no longer exists in the form it used to. And unnamed grief cannot be processed because it hasn't been identified as grief. You can't sit with something that you haven't acknowledged is there. We think about it like this: you can't grieve what you haven't allowed yourself to name as a loss. And you cannot heal what you have not admitted is broken or needs healing. And this is not about wallowing or going backwards. It's about giving the feeling its correct label so your nervous system can actually begin to process it rather than manage it indefinitely. So I promised you an exercise. So if you're up for it, let's get into it. Now, as you know me, guys, as I always say, if you're not up for it, that's fine. Just fast forward through the exercise. You need to be in the right space for this because it's not about making the grief bigger or giving it more power. It's about giving it enough shape that you can actually work with it rather than around it. So if you're up for it, let's do this with love and kindness for self. And I'm going to ask you to think about something that you're carrying right now, something that feels heavy or sad, something that feels like just a low hum in the background of loss, sadness, even if it's something that you haven't been calling grief. I'm going to ask 3 questions to have a think about. And as always, pause the video if you want to spend a bit more time in between those questions. So step 1, let's identify what's gone. And this is not who, this is a what. What's gone, right? Is it a version of yourself, a future that you had imagined, a relationship that changed form, a sense of safety you had before something happened, or, a life chapter that's closed? And try and name it as specifically as you can. Not my old relationship, but the version of myself who believed that the relationship was safe. So take a minute, pause if you need to, and we'll go to step 2. Step 2, acknowledge that it was real. Whatever it is, it was real to you. It mattered. The fact that it wasn't a formal death, that other people might not understand it, that you might feel silly naming it, none of that changes the fact that it was real and now it's gone. The size of your grief is not determined by whether other people would understand it. It's determined by how much that thing mattered to you. So once again, take a pause if need be, and we'll go to step 3. So step 3, say it out loud or write it down. Just once. That's all you got to do, just once. Something like, I am grieving the loss of ... Yeah, finish the sentence. That single act of naming it moves it from a formless weight into something your mind can begin to sort of hold consciously rather than unconsciously carry. And if you feel comfortable, please share in the comments, not the details, obviously, just whether this resonated and, what you were carrying as the name, just the name. So if you walked into this video not knowing why you felt the way you did, and you're walking out even with a partial name for it, that matters. Naming it is not the whole of grief, but it's always where it starts. Now, if this resonated, there are 2 free things in the description that you can use to help. I have a Reclaiming Yourself After Trauma and Grief resource for anyone who wants to go deeper. And my inner blog, for anyone who wants a quieter space to process this, there's some resources there around trauma and grief in that space. No pressure, just there if you need them. They're all free. They're all there for you to use. So tell me in the comments, is there a loss in your life right now that you have not been calling grief? You don't have to share what it is, but let us know if this has landed. And as always, guys, thank you for the support, loving the subscribes, the energy exchange of likes, and let me know in the comments if there's any videos that you would like me to do in this space. Sending you lots of love, and I'll see you next week. Bye.